Hello, everyone, and welcome back to I'll Just Interview Myself. My name is Reese, and I help people find and pursue their purpose professionally for a living, and I really like talking about it online, on the internet. It's, I think, the most important question, the question of what questions should we be asking, and how does that relate to our purpose and our meaning and community and all of these things, and how are they tied together? And there are so many wonderful thinkers, creatives, artists, put any amazing, wonderful title here, that I really respect and hold in such high esteem and have really, really impacted the way that I view the world and have shaped my journey to where I'm at right now and will probably stick with me as I continue to evolve and change and grow and develop new and different facets of my worldview. I also have a podcast called Making Meaning, where I interview people that I really respect about how they make meaning in their lives. And there are some people that I would love to interview. But of course, as a small podcaster, that's not exactly within the realm of possibility right now. I also love talking about my own story and my own path to this. And I realized as I was listening to podcasts about all of these things and all of these wonderful people that I respect, that I would find myself pausing the podcast to answer the questions as though I am the one being interviewed, or respond in the conversation as though I am there with these people. I said that in the first episode and it's still just as embarrassing to admit, but I'm hoping it gets easier as we do this. So yes, I enjoy hearing myself talk, but I think too, when something isn't happening yet in your life, like being able to interview some of these people that I really respect, you go out and you make it happen for yourself. So this series was born. I thought, well, hey, I'll just interview myself through these podcasts I know and love. So for the first episode of I'll Just Interview Myself, I reacted to Rhett of Rhett and Link and Good Mythical Morning and Mythical as a company. I reacted to Rhett's spiritual deconstruction episode of Ear Biscuits, the Mythical podcast. I talked a little bit in that first episode about why I started with Ear Biscuits and Rhett and Link and why they are so important to me as a creative person, as a human. I've been watching Rhett and Link since I was 11, I want to say. I was a mythical beast when Good Mythical Morning was still Good Morning Chia Lincoln. I so enjoyed reacting to Rhett's video and verbally processing it and using that to think about how I was processing things and also using that to think about the episode more deeply. I'm already back to react to Link's spiritual deconstruction episode, which I knew I wanted to do, both of them at least, of course. And the reason I did Rhett's first is because that is how they decided to release the podcast episodes as well. So I'm trying to respect the format that they did there. And I can't wait. In honor of reacting to Link's spiritual deconstruction, I'm wearing my Macon Brothers album cover t-shirt that is merch from a mythical project called Hazel, I want to say. I think it's called Hazel. So if you don't know what that is, go watch it. It's one of my favorite things that Rhett and Link has ever done. I also, if you have not yet watched Wonderhole, please go watch it. It is amazing and fabulous. And as always, these reaction videos are out of the utmost and deepest respect for these creators. And everyone that I react to, I'm going to try and use as a way to communicate my views, but also think about the ideas that they're suggesting and process those more deeply too. So I think that's all I have. Hey y'all, quick note from Editing Reese here. There are a few audio oddities in this episode. The software that I used to record this episode does not like me very much, and I'm still playing around with it and trying to figure out the best way to record these at as high of quality as possible for y'all. So please give me some grace on that front for today's episode, and it should be fixed for the next one. Let's dive into it.
Welcome to Ear Biscuits. I'm Rhett.
And I'm Link. This week at the Round Table of Dim Lighting, it's part 4 of I think what we're calling 4 total episodes in our Lost Years slash Spiritual Journey series.
Well, I hope we're calling it 4 parts if it is part 4.
Well, there may be other parts. I mean,
Well, yeah. We're
that's what I was
the
getting
conversation.
at. So in part 1 and 2, we discussed what happened externally between college and becoming YouTubers, and then in parts 3, you discussed what happened more internally with you in terms of your spiritual deconstruction, and here we are at part 4. It's my turn to spill my guts. It's been very good for me to prep for this episode. I feel emotional. I think just in general,
I would
and also
too.
nervous to share.
Well, before you get into it, I will say that, having shared first, the thing I told Jesse when I got home is I was like, man, I just feel like this giant weight has been lifted off of me. It's
Because we talked about it, or just because there was.
Well, it's just I feel like there's this story that I've had that is so personal, and you kind of carry it around, and you know how much it has impacted who you are.
Yeah.
But you know how kind of touchy it is to talk about it,
Right.
and to just get it out there. Like I started realizing how much emotion I had kind of attached to it, but it was actually more kind of after I had done it that it sort of like kind of released a little bit.
Did you weep in the shower?
I'm excited to hear the answer to that question. I have watched this before, by the way, but it was several years ago. I've probably rewatched it in between the first time I watched it and now, but I don't remember the details. But just so you know, I have watched it before. But I do think that release is so common that it's almost like when you build something up in your head, you don't even really experience it in real time. And then afterwards, it like all of the energy just kind of hits your body like a truck. I actually did something the other day that was really, really scary and frightening, but I decided I needed to do it for my own personal growth. And in the midst of it, it felt like an out-of-body experience, like I wasn't going through it. And then when it was over and I was getting ready to go to bed, my head hit my pillow and I was out because my body was so exhausted from having gone through that. But it's like you're not consciously aware of that happening, but your subconscious feels that.
I don't remember weeping. But no, it's just, what I'm getting
But
at
you
is
did take a shower.
it is super emotional.
All right, let me get into it. I think I was trying to figure out why I was so nervous, and Christy really helped me process this, and I think it's that I don't want to disappoint people. For some reason, not only dedicated mythical beasts who may find out that my beliefs don't align with theirs, but also my friends, both past and present, and my extended family. This is not something that there's been an occasion for me to discuss this with them, and I just, because I just didn't want, I don't want to disappoint them, so one thing I want to say, I don't intend to, and I hope that no one listening feels implicated in my story. I'm grateful.
Starting with vulnerability is always a good place to start. From a clinical perspective, it endears the audience towards you, but from a real perspective, it oftentimes is the most authentic beginning. It's where the beginning begins. I think anytime we confront something like fear, unknown, uncertainty, mystery, the things that spirituality and religion try to answer, the thing that underlies all of that is vulnerability. It's because deep down, we're all kids who want to be taken care of and protected. And I think owning the reality of that not only really grounds us into where Link is in this process now, and how that relates to his communities and to other people, because that is really the heart of most religions, is in the communal experience. But it also grounds us into the topic of spiritual deconstruction, because why do religions persist? Why do spiritualities persist? Because we as human beings are desperate to alleviate the stress and cognitive dissonance of what is this all about? And that's what these episodes really sit at the crux of. And that is one of the most vulnerable questions you can ask and evolve through your answering of.
For the path that I've taken, for the pain and the joy and the mistakes and the thrills associated with it, because I don't think there was any other way for me to get to here. And I know that I'm extremely fortunate because I know that there's so many people who've had deeply traumatic experiences.
Gratitude is also a great place to start.
Their own spiritual journeys. So I'm grateful. I'm still in process, and this is my story up to this point. And I am going to go back. I want to start by telling a couple of stories just to give you snapshots of, just to help you feel what it was like to be me growing up in an evangelical Christian environment. So I'll just go ahead and get into the first story. In 1988, I was 10 years old, and Bowie's Creek First Baptist Church, the church that I'd gone to my entire life. Mm-hmm. You know, I didn't have any memories of not going to this church. It's also the church that you started going to and with your family when you moved here in first grade. They were holding a revival, which is a series of nights where you get together and there's speakers, and it gets real. About making contact with God, I think.
And an Irish guy.
Was he not Scottish, or was he Irish?
Well, as you know, I'm trying to blur the lines between those two things these days. So
in my memory, the dude is Scottish.
Okay, Scottish.
So this preacher that came in from out of town, I guess way out of town, was preaching at least on this last night, like the culmination night. This is the big one. People gonna make decisions this night.
Cry night.
He gives a sermon and he explains that every person who's born into this world is born in a sinful state. Before you've done anything wrong, you have a compulsion to do things wrong. You have this selfishness. You're in sin. Put that in quotes.
Let me tell you something about that. I do think that this is where the majority of any trauma I have from my religious upbringing comes from, is this idea that you are not good inherently. You were actually born bad and in sin, and not for anything you did, for something Adam and Eve did, supposedly. Whether that's metaphorical or literal or not, you are guilty, period. And I have struggled, I have anxiety and OCD, and I have struggled with the ability to love myself my entire life. And the first emotion I remember feeling so strongly and being like, whoa, is guilt. Is that I am bad. And it's almost that like feeling you get when you do something embarrassing and your cheeks flush to the point where your face gets like prickly. I remember feeling like that in church. And my very first panic attack was actually, maybe I'll tell this story in another video where I talk about my own spiritual deconstruction, but the long and the short of it is that first panic attack was rooted in guilt for me. Anytime I was at any VBS, sermon, church experience, church camp, whatever, and there was cry night. That's a whole experience where it's the last night where everyone ends up crying and coming to Jesus, and you're told it's because you can feel the power of God in the room, but it's actually because they've sleep deprived you and made you physically exhausted every single day, and you're away from home and you have to make new friends and everything is new and you're not getting enough nutrients because they're also feeding you. And so naturally, when something really emotional happens, you're just more prone to that experience. But at anything like this, I would feel the need to once again devote my life that Jesus Christ is the only begotten Son, and he came down and died on the cross for my sins, so that I may have everlasting life in heaven. And I was so scared that even once I had done it, you're supposed to be good. You did it. You're good. You gave your heart to God. You're all good. Every time there was an opportunity, the voice in the back of my head was, what if? What if it didn't work? What if you are going to hell? And I would have to recommit every time. Do you hear the OCD and the anxiety? And I think that's because even the voice in my head that was telling me, but you've already done it, you're good. I didn't trust that voice because I had been taught the only voice that I can trust is God's. The one who says you're bad innately. And it's hard to love yourself when that's what you're told.
And God, who created you, is being perfectly just cannot abide by these shortcomings that we have baked into who we are as humans.
That he baked into who we are.
That's got to be punished. You got to, and the punishment is not it's not a minor punishment here, because it's if you're anything short of God's standard of perfection, well, that shortcoming needs to be paid for.
With life in hell.
So,
but he's perfect and all loving.
Came to this concept of eternal separation from God, and I'm pretty sure there was a mention of like eternal torment in fiery hell.
The weeping and gnashing of teeth.
So as a 10-year-old, just imagine 10-year-old Link. I was still sleeping with a pound puppy, you know? And this was a big deal. This was something that was talked about in our church, but it was different in revival. You were really listening. And so I was like, this is a big deal. I mean, eternal damnation, that's scary. And especially if it's coming from a guy who came all the way from Scotland or Ireland to tell me about it. How could it not scare you, you know?
It's terrifying.
But then he explained that God is not only perfectly just, he's also perfectly loving. And he wants to make another way for us to have a relationship with him and not be eternally separated or currently separated from God. And it turns out God's solution is that he sent his son to come to earth, Jesus, live a perfect life, never deserve an ounce of punishment or God's wrath or hell or damnation, but then willingly take it on himself anyway. And he was executed, hung on a cross, crucified, died, and paid the penalty.
Also, I do want to clarify one thing. In the first episode and this episode, as I refer to God as he and use gendered pronouns, that is because that's how the Christian faith views their God, is as masculine sky daddy kind of thing. And part of my critique of Christianity is that. And so I'm actually trying to be very specific in using that gendered language because it's part of something that I vehemently disagree with in the mythology. But when I begin to talk about my source, my God, I attempt to use non-binary pronouns and language in terms of that, because I'm like, that makes the most sense to me, or at least feminine female language, because that feels empowering as well. So code switching back and forth between those does get difficult. I'm not going to do this perfectly, but just so you know, when you hear gendered language, that at least is my attempt and why a little bit behind why that's my attempt there.
Instead of us as individuals paying the penalty. And then he rose from the dead. He resurrected, and now he's seated at the right hand of God, and he's listening to this sermon right now. So then Scottish dude explained, all you got to do is accept the fact that he took the punishment that you deserved. And you also have to get up out of your pew and
that you deserved. You deserve to be crucified on the cross. Just by being born. You automatically deserve that. That is the message that is told. And I don't know about other Christians out there, but the story of the crucifixion that I was told was torturous. It's not a romantic idea of martyrdom. It is horrifying. And the very first lesson on Easter I ever had is at this Christian private school, and my pre-K teacher has visual representations on cards that are about as big as like a laptop screen, and had pieces of paper to cover them up, and shows us as she talks through the story of the crucifixion, because that's the Easter story, what happened to Jesus. Mind you, this is pre-K. We're 4 turning 5. She told us for this next picture, and of course all the pictures had been really, really intense. There was Jesus crying tears of blood in the garden as he asks God, why? Why must I do this? If there's anything else I can do, let it be that. And God says, no, you must do this. Him carrying his own cross through the town on his back, sweating, the crown of thorns being placed on his head, stabbing into the skin, blood dripping down. And then right before she gets to the last, not the last picture, but the climactic picture of Jesus being crucified, she tells us, look away if you don't think you can handle it. A group of 4 and 5-year-olds, look away if you don't think you can handle it. I don't remember the exact verbiage she used, but I vividly remember putting my hands over my eyes. And then hearing the reaction from my classmates and needing to peek through. Seeing something blurry and scary and snapping my fingers shut and looking away. Let's be generous. 5 years old. And that's the punishment you deserved. And Jesus didn't. But yeah, drag queen story time's real bad. Insanity. So when I talk about being traumatized by my religious upbringing, one, not my parents. My parents did not traumatize me through religion. It was leaders in these other religious spaces that I happened to be in. But also, it's like I struggle with the word trauma because nothing specifically traumatizing happened to me in the way that that can happen to people. But that is one of dozens of experiences that I had that were traumatic.
You got to walk down there in front of everybody, by the way. But man,
the cry
I
night
was so scared. And I was like,
moment.
I knew other people. I knew you had already done this.
Well, can I just say, I remember being at Contact Eddie, and I remember seeing you get up. And you know what I was thinking? I was like, it's about damn time. I mean, I was like, I did this when I was 6.
Yeah.
I was like, why is he taking so long?
You know, you thought you were a little Scottish.
Does he not understand the gospel? Like, you don't have to be double digits. Were you waiting to be double digits? Because I was like, I don't know what the age of accountability is, but all I know is I don't want to die and go to hell.
I was a bit of a late bloomer, and I thought I think that was my age of accountability.
Yeah, I think everybody's age of accountability is different, especially if you're still sleeping with a pound puppy. It's like a free pass.
I remember
By the
Maybe
way,
I don't know
a lot of Christianese.
what a pound puppy is.
The age of accountability is the age at which, if you aren't a Christian and you die, you won't go to hell because
or just before that.
Because you're not old enough to process.
You can't make the decision for yourself.
And it's nowhere in the Bible. It's just.
I am glad they explained that because that is a point of contention. But when Link first said pound puppy, I thought he meant like a puppy that they got from the pound. But now that he said you're still sleeping with a pound puppy, I'm like, is that something that I don't know what it is? Because in my head, I was like, oh, what a cute image. Like a little boy sleeping with his dog, his little mutt. I want to Google that.
You kind of have to come up with theologically, because if you don't have it, it's pretty bad.
Wow.
The kid's going to hell.
I understood it that day.
Right.
And so I got up the gumption and I went forward. And I remember that they paired you off with people, and I got to be led in a prayer by Amy Moore.
Ooh,
this girl, you
nice.
know, I was 10. This girl was like in high school. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And she said, repeat after me. And I accepted what Jesus did for me. And at that point, I'm like, Jesus rose from the dead. He saved my life. I'm glad I don't have to worry about that hell thing anymore. And I owe this guy everything.
This preacher or Jesus?
Jesus.
Okay.
And I really like Scottish people. Now.
That might be Irish.
But I don't want to talk to them because they are scary. And I was like, you know what? I'm doing this is my life now. I got it all set up.
We're good.
And I'm singing in the choir.
We're so good.
I sang in the choir with a bunch of adults on the following Sunday, still wearing our Contact 88 t-shirts. I was beaming.
A pound puppy is a line of stuffed animals. I should have known, so that makes sense. But also, nothing wrong with still sleeping with stuffed animals. I never slept with stuffed animals. Slept with one that my grandma got for me after she passed away for a while. But other than that, I never slept with stuffed animals until I was 22. And one of my best friends gifted me one. And now the 2 stuffed animals I have, I sleep with every single night, and they were both gifted to me by the same friend. Nothing wrong with sleeping with stuffed animals. I'm a adult sleeping with stuffed animals ally.
I was a little bit jealous. I was like, maybe I should have waited so I could sing in the choir.
Everything, we were still very involved in church and in youth group. I mean, if I had to rank the things that I associated my identity with, yeah, I was a soccer player in high school, and I was pretty amazing at it. I don't know what else I would say besides that, but that would be number 3.
Math Olympiad.
But number 1 would definitely be that I was a Christian. So then when we went to college and got involved in Campus Crusade for Christ, all of a sudden, everyone in that group was also devoted to God in the same way. Everybody wanted the same thing. It was exciting because it was so much easier for me to be who I'd lived my entire life aspiring to be, somebody completely sold out for Jesus. You know, so the things that we weren't doing and the things that we were doing may seem a little odd. Like, I mean, there wasn't any partying ever in like the traditional tropish collegiate sense. There was a lot of group dates going on. You know, if you were interested in somebody, there was like the way to be as pure as possible about approaching dating.
I was really good at organizing those. I could have a men's Bible study, take a women's Bible study out for just a night on the town.
And you know, as long as you're in a group, it's like you can stay out of trouble. Christy and I never kissed until we were engaged to be married. You know, that was my decision. That's not something that anybody forced on me. You know, that wasn't the specific teaching of anybody, but
because I did not subscribe to that particular.
And I just did not want to screw up my
There's the guilt.
relationship with Christy, and because I saw that it has so much potential, and I wanted to please God, you know, and I wanted to do it right. You know how I think. There's a best way to do everything. There's a perfect execution of everything, and I'm going to try to. It's safest if I stay within that, you know, especially when it comes to disappointing God or not. So yeah, we were. It may seem odd to you listening.
You were a great handholder, I'm assuming.
That was I was so calculated. I was like, I'm only going to go out on a date with her once a month, and we're only going to talk once a week. And I want her to, I don't want to get in the way of her being devoted to God, and I want to be devoted to God and her second. And I felt for the old me reading back through my journals, and I'll read one in a second, but I just want to, I was extreme because of just the way I interacted with the environment and the teaching. But it was thrilling to be, like we said before, it was thrilling to answer a higher calling, to connect with God, and to go through it with really great friends. It was the most meaning and satisfaction I'd ever experienced in my life, within that context.
That is the thing that keeps you hanging on, is that meaning. It gives you literally ultimate purpose. The fear of that unknown is so calmed that the idea of turning back into it and away from the safety of belief is so hard. So hard.
But as I prepped for this, I did go back and I read through my journals. And whenever I would journal, it was always in the form of prayer. I was writing a letter to God because it was hard for me to pray. But if I wrote it down, at least I could concentrate and I could get my thoughts out. And it was at least my side of the conversation with God. You did that too, some, right?
Yeah.
I know a lot of women in the church growing up who would journal in the form of letters to their future husband. I'll just let that one sit.
But I want to read an excerpt from this one journal entry from, this is my junior year, so January 20th, 1999, okay? So this is what I wrote. Lord, I'm frustrated about us. I just feel guilty that it's not clicking, like I'm just bad or wrong or lazy or something. I'm tired of feeling pressure and guilt to spend time with you. Lord, I would quit trying altogether if I didn't know how stupid and mindless that would be. To whom shall I go? Which was like my paraphrase of a Bible verse, meaning where would I turn if I turned away from God? And it wasn't just that journal entry. Like the vast majority of my journal entries over those years, it was actually heartbreaking. They were filled, and I'm talking like 80% of anything I would write. It was filled with me apologizing for disappointing God. A lot of guilt, a lot of shame.
To continue the thought that I was just sharing, not about the letters to the husband, but before that, the belief is so hard to turn away from because of the fear, because of the, to whom would I go? Where would I go? To the question mark over there in the corner? No, you've covered that up. I don't want that. It's scary. But the thing that continues to let your eyes wander is how bad it feels when you feel bad all the time. When you are working from the belief that you are inherently bad. You begin to really hate yourself when everything in your life is colored by, Link is saying in this, he's constantly apologizing and asking God for forgiveness. And when your life is literally colored by shortcomings that you are making and having to ask a non-tangible being for forgiveness, and you don't know if he has forgiven you, you can only hope and pray that by asking for him to come into your heart, that you won't go to hell. It's so scary. I keep saying that, but it's like, I think the intellectual pursuit of exploring things after deconstructing in Rhett's story is very much similar to mine in this wanting to explore and read and like voraciously consume as much content as I can about meaning and purpose and worldviews and religions and philosophies. I still have that today. But Link's characterization of what it felt like to be in the church is so on par with my experience of just the deep shame that is the lens through which you see any experience.
A lot of frustration for not being devoted enough. And I didn't really appreciate or recall that internal struggle that I was having. I'd kind of forgotten that until I went back and started reading through the journals, and I was a little bit shocked. It's not that I journaled all the time, and I do think there's a factor of I would journal when I felt like I really needed my relationship with God needed a kick in the pants, like I really needed to like buckle down. And so, and then if things were going better, I just didn't journal. Maybe that's another explanation. But it was a lot of my private experience, I think, was kind of defined by that level of shame and frustration. And I don't, tell me what I don't want to imply that the main teaching from Cru or our church, the church that we grew up in, was really super legalistic. I don't think they were not super legalistic. There was not a constant emphasis.
That's part of the difficulty with the feeling of shame and guilt too. I do think that women tend to get that messaging more than men do. But even there are wonderful, wonderful people in the church and that I had as mentors that were deeply devoted, that never said anything to make me feel guilty or shameful from them, like in receipt of their feelings of guilt and shame towards me. I think it's just the foundation of being born a sinner. And even if it's not all of these leaders and people that you're friends with and pastors and priests saying, feel guilty, be ashamed of these actions that you have taken, it's the subtext that exists throughout the Bible, throughout sermons, throughout the foundation of Christianity, because Christianity does not work without that. If you're born inherently worthy, inherently good, why do you need someone to die on the cross? You don't.
On following certain rules, the emphasis was on having like a personal relationship with God, but there are factors associated with going about that relationship that the way that I internalized that was that I was failing at it, that I didn't have what like the people who it was really working for had, that I was very hard on myself.
Well, I would say that we were on a spectrum. So I would say that compared to just the general population, we were legalistic, without a doubt.
Oh, yeah.
Because we did have a bunch of rules that were
not kissing until engagement is pretty legalistic
of the Bible that and applied to our specific situation and our specific culture that kind of led to things like not kissing your girlfriend until you're engaged to be married. But I do think that most of this is just the way that different personalities interact with it. Because for me, I was having all those intellectual thoughts and doubts, and that's a lot of the stuff that I would be like writing about and thinking about. But when it came to, and of course I felt like, oh, I'm prideful and I'm lustful and all the, the ways that I thought I was sinful. Mm-hmm. But I think I kind of gave myself more of a break than you did, just because that's my personality.
I don't think I was hard on myself that I sinned. I was hard on myself that I didn't have a quality of relationship with God where I was motivated to connect with him, to pray, to do like the spiritual disciplines of like study the Bible and pray, and the things that I felt like were a true test of intimacy with God, like the human's role in that. I felt like I was trying to pull myself up by my bootstraps. I was trying to conjure something that I didn't.
It wasn't easy. And I think that is another message that gets delivered in the church a lot, is that this isn't easy. You're going to be tested. the devil's going to throw things at you, or God wants to test you too so that you can prove your loyalty. And if it feels like you're constantly failing those tests, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, am I failing at being a Christian? But I did give my heart over to Jesus though. Am I good or not? And it's hard to wrestle with these things in the confines of your own mind. One other thing I want to say about the not kissing your girlfriend till you're engaged and the writing notes to your future husband, one thing that's not touched on in these two videos that I'll add just briefly here is the womanly experience in the church being one much more colored by shame and in relationship to men, and the role that not just God, but men should play in your life too. Yes, God is first, but your husband's second. And if you don't have a husband, it's your dad and then your brother, right? And that gets really difficult when it comes to this question of shame. And I think that's why we see so much, like, why were women journaling to their future husbands instead of to God like Link was? While that can be a beautiful practice, for some people, I don't want to take away that either, that there is something actually really lovely in wanting that relationship and thinking of that and putting hope in certain things. But I think the darker side of that is, one, not living in the present, but also that indicates to me that you are already living your life for someone else and not for yourself. And I think if having a relationship, getting married, is something that you want in your life, you should want that for you, not because it's the right thing to do, or the quote unquote right thing to do. And I think in this kind of journaling to your future husband, to me, there is this sense of like, well, of course I'm going to have a husband someday. I'm a woman in the church. That just feels really wrong. The hierarchy that women are given just completely decenters the self. And not only are you kind of forced into this understanding of the personal relationship with God, but there's another pillar in between you and God, which is whatever man is in your life. My brother, who is my older brother, when we were both at this Christian private school, no, that's not true. I was still in elementary school, and he had just started at this Christian private school that I went to later for middle school. But I was at a public elementary school, and we got into an argument of some kind, of course. And I will never forget him looking at me and saying, "You need to respect me. I am your elder." You're a year and a half older than me. And it made me so angry. And while he didn't directly say this thing about, I'm a man, I'm your brother, you need to respect me, in hindsight, thinking about it, it's like he is getting this messaging from this Christian school, and then your little sister defies you? Well, you need to respect me. Yes, we all need to respect each other, duh. But in this, like, respect me as an authority, it feels different. I do want to highlight here that when I speak about these things, that it is very much just in my experience, and absolutely there is a way to hold Christian beliefs and not be sexist and have an equal partnership. 100%. I actually know a lot of people who do that very beautifully. I do think for me that was just one of the messages that I was given growing up. That was part of why it just didn't stick.
When we joined staff of Crew, now my spiritual identity was also my professional identity. And, I was fully committed to God, but also now financially completely dependent on all these people who believed in what I believed in, and they believed in the work that we were doing when we raised financial support. So I put even more pressure on myself because I had these people investing in our work, and I was a professional Christian at this point. Shouldn't I be good at it? Should I start to have a little bit of a Scottish accent?
Yeah, you should.
But I I had this nagging sense of being hollow, that, that I just, it was always there, couldn't quite shake it. And around this time, that's when Rhett started talking about the age of the earth and the validity of evolution. We started talking about those things. When you started talking about them with me, I was, I didn't have, I don't have doubts, and I don't sit around as I'm falling asleep or in my spare time just like having logic battles in my mind. It's just not, I have the battles I was having was I'm not doing this good enough. I just devoted all of my energy there.
Link's battle feels much more internally motivated, where it's like the issue that I'm bumping up against is one inside myself, whereas Rhett's issue is that he's bumping up against is data that's being presented externally, right? And I almost think that's kind of the crux of why this is different for the both of them, and why even in Rhett's story he doesn't talk much about guilt or shame. He talks about truth and facts and knowledge, and how it all relates back to truth. It really does change and depend on your personality and your predisposition to how you interact with these things. And yet, both of them still ended up deconstructing. I think there's also a really big tension with finances being related to spirituality or something like this. I face this as a creator who finding and pursuing purpose is kind of my spirituality in a lot of ways now, and it's how I make money. And so there is an added responsibility there. I do think for me, having built it in a way that I've been tried to be very mindful of building in the knowledge that and the fact that this is going to continue evolving and changing as I do, and something I say one day, I could have a completely different experience of tomorrow. That isn't necessarily true in Christianity, because it's kind of, this is the truth. It's been the truth for 6,000 years. And so it's not going to change, right? But I do still feel that tension when it's something so deeply personal and you're also making it public and then relying on it in this way. It does change your relationship to it, your psychological relationship and attunement to that thing.
But whenever you would bring something up, first of all, I knew well, I'm not going to panic. You made the joke of Jesse would start crying because it was perceived as such a threat. And I totally get that. I remember having an internal dialogue of, okay, just don't panic. Be cool about this. Just be a sounding board for what Rhett wants to talk about, because, I'm not going to fall for the trap of you can't go there because it might lead to something. It's I started listening, and, when you read Francis Collins' The Language of God in 2006, I also read that. And I was I'm convinced in the validity of evolution. And I remember an unintended consequence of reading that book was I just had this sense, and we discussed it, that there was an island with God on it, and it was shrinking as science discovered more and more. And it would ultimately lead to a place where the waters of science would cover the top of the island, and there would be no more God. That's actually what we were taught in terms of this. If you start looking into evolution, it's a slippery slope. That's what they would say.
And I will say, ironically,
what a crazy thing to tell people.
My story and your story. I'm not trying to give us that much credit. This is, so many people are going to listen to this, but a lot of people like Ken Ham, and the head of Answers in Genesis are going to be like, I told you, and he's got an Australian accent, but he's going to say, I told you, you can't.
I cannot imagine the island analogy being what you tell people to make them not look further, because I would be I'm like, that just goes against every intuition I have. That's like, well, if it's possible for science to completely overtake God, why would we need God? Again, I mentioned this in Rhett's episode, Occam's razor. Why, if the water can completely cover up that island, it doesn't matter if I believe the island's under there or not. My boat's still floating on the water. But I do think within this analogy, one of my favorite quotes that I was going to bring up at the end of this episode when I got a little bit more into where I'm at with my spirituality now is Arthur C. Clarke's third law, but it's that any sufficient science will be indistinguishable from magic. And I love that quote. One, because it affirms the reality that there are things that we know now, thanks to science, that were magic back in the day. And I think I talked about this a little bit in the first episode too. Spells were something that women were burned at the stake for. Now, someone wakes up and says affirmations in the mirror, and we know that psychologically that's going to make you feel better. And when you feel better, you walk throughout your day with more confidence, and someone having confidence is naturally attractive to people. But is the affirmation a magic spell? I say so, yeah. We just understand the psychology behind it now. That doesn't, just because there's science there, doesn't mean that it's not magical. I think in a more complex way, though, that's just kind of like the surface layer of this. When we look at something like quantum physics, where things pop in and out of existence, or black matter, energy cannot be created or destroyed, these truths that we kind of have as a baseline of scientific reason that we can build other things on. When you keep poking and you keep digging, they do start to fall apart. And it's kind of like, why? Why do they? A lot of people hold this belief that like eventually we'll understand everything, right? Like consciousness will no longer be a mystery. Black matter will no longer be a mystery. What's in the ocean will no longer be a mystery. And I think even if those things aren't mysteries, there will always be the mystery of why. And the fact that we have the scientific capacity to understand quantum physics and it stupefies us more is beautifully terrifying to me. I'm like, that is the sublime poetic experience. And that is what I feel when I hear this quote, that any sufficient science will be indistinguishable from magic. It's the same thing as science and religion supporting each other to me. It's, why can't my God be the same energy that exists in and around all of the atoms that make up this world? To put it condensedly.
Can't believe in evolution. Look what happened if you do it, if you believe in it, and it's all Francis Collins' fault.
Well, I'm very grateful, but I think because that wasn't his point in the book, the shrinking island thing, but it's something that we discussed, and that because we just started asking these questions of like, well, if Adam and Eve never existed, doesn't Paul say in the Bible that the whole point of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection was to undo Adam's original sin? And then, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to get, I'm like, I'm a professional Christian.
I'm a professional.
I'm panicking inside. So I'm like, what am I gonna do? Just like become homeless? It was too much at stake. So I kept the most threatening questions at bay until after we left staff. Mm-hmm. And so in 2008 up until 2011, I mean, we were starting our career as YouTubers, and then that time frame where we were developing this new career, I was also developing a growing spiritual disillusionment. And there were two parallel paths for me. One was the intellectual path, and then the other parallel path was the experiential, what was happening to me in my heart and in my circumstance. So I'll talk about both of those. First, I mean, intellectually, the discussions that we had, they continued. I think they accelerated. It was the next thing, and again, you can kind of superimpose Rhett's talk on top of mine whenever he mentions like dismantling his view. It was also my view of the Old Testament. You know, the early stuff in the Old Testament, it can't be literal. You know, becoming convinced of that. And then continuing to read in the Old Testament, it's like the Old Testament God mandated a lot of actions that troubled me. I just, you know, it was like, you worship a God that does, I mean, there's some, I mean, I'm not even talking about head scratchers. I'm talking about like, oh my gosh, this is frightening. Our view of the Bible started to dismantle. We were having lots of conversations about it. I wasn't chomping at the bit to go home and report all of these conversations because I didn't know. I thought it was a thought exercise. You know, I didn't know where it was going to lead, and I didn't want to. I was like, man, I want to process this with Christy, but I don't want to scare her. Mm-hmm. So I talked to her about, you know, for every 8 times we talked, I might talk to her about it once, just because it was, a lot of other shit going on in our lives. I don't want to add that into the equation.
I mean, I think just thank God they had each other to talk to about this, because I cannot imagine, well, I was about to say, I can't imagine going through this on my own. And then I was like, well, I kind of did. But at the same time, my parents were much more flexible in their spiritual life. And even though I was in these different environments, it wasn't as though when I went home, like, we're not praying before dinner. So my deconstruction looks very different in that way. So was it kind of on my own for me? Yes. But at the same time, it's not as though that was separating me from everyone and everything I'm close to.
There were a lot of places that I guess I was having an internal existential crisis, you know, but I remember it being very palpable every Sunday morning, because I would get on stage and I would pray, and I would lead the music, and I would say some things to help contextualize the songs that we were singing, so that people in the audience could like really connect with God. Yet I found it virtually impossible for me to be able to connect with God in that way through music on a Sunday morning. And I remember I would try harder and harder. I would like clamp my eyes shut and really concentrate on the words that I was singing that were moving people emotionally and spiritually out there. But for me, it proved, it was like there was a brick wall there. I just couldn't get there.
There is so much effort in Link's story, right? He's like, I just tried so hard. And in the journal entries he was talking about it, I want to be better. I'm frustrated that I'm not better. And it's almost like when you try at something that at a certain point, it's like, why are you continuing to bang your head against a wall, right? Like, at some point, don't you just stop? It feels like there's like an impenetrable barrier within your heart. How can something be right for you if it feels like that? Well, maybe it's another test. Maybe the devil put that block there. I don't know. There's a lot of ways that you can explain this feeling away, but the one that I clearly kept returning to and keep returning to is kind of like what Rhett talked about, truth. What is my truth? And if you feel that wall, it's like, that's trying to bust through that. It's not true for me.
And that was really frustrating. And I think there's a lot of, there were practical aspects to that. And it's like, I am a performer. You're on stage, people are watching, even if the goal is to not be seen and
performative
step out of the way,
spirituality,
so to speak. That's probably still a factor. And then when I start thinking about it, it's like, I don't know. It's just, I remember after church every Sunday, I would tell Christy, I'm just I'm not who they think I am. They think I'm clamping my eyes shut because I'm having such a meaningful experience, but I'm clamping my eyes shut because I can't find anything.
Almost nothing will make you feel more isolated than pretending to be something you aren't, than feeling misunderstood. Here, Link is saying, like, I'm performing. I'm literally performing this act, but people are drawing their conclusions from it that I want them to draw because I don't want anyone to know I'm struggling with this, but it feels like shit for this community that I'm supposed to be a part of to not know me. I think one of the things that religion does really well is bringing people together. And if there was a way for them to bridge this gap, right, for the doubting and the questioning and the vulnerability to actually bring you closer to one another like it does psychologically, but it pushes you away from a church community if you're doubting, right? So it's like, while, yes, we know vulnerability brings us together, thank you, Brene Brown, in this context, it gets so hard to be vulnerable about the very thing that you're doing. And then no one knows you. You're trying to fit in, not belong, in Brene Brown's words.
To come to a head like the 6 months leading up to us moving to LA.
Just to add a little color to this, speaking of our conversations, we also had another kind of conversation, and we had it pretty often. Do you remember we would be sitting in that office in Lillington, or even our office in Fuquay, and we would be like, man, you know, I just feel like we really haven't been focusing on the Lord, and like a lot of things are happening, and like I just feel like we need to just recognize how we got where we're at, and seek the Lord's guidance. And like me and you would just sit there and pray together.
Yeah, we would have, and the first part of the prayer was,
It's always like, Lord, man, we suck.
yeah, it's like, you've given us so much. You're giving us our heart's desire. Like we have this career.
There's a lot of guilt. There was a lot of guilt. There was a lot of shame. But even in the reason I'm adding that is because I'm just remembering in the midst of again.
Dear Lord, we suck. I think we need to sit with that for a second. I remember praying that prayer. How could I possibly be worthy of the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross? Because I have been told every single day of my life that I am bad and I'm not pouring glory back to you. To have something that so deeply makes you feel inadequate is not healthy. If it makes you a better person and it brings you joy and light, amazing. That is not my experience with it. Dear Lord, we suck. I never want to feel that way ever again. And I made myself feel that way for a really long time. For a really long time. No one deserves to feel that way. And I guarantee you, if you are a Christian or not, the actual teachings of Jesus would not say that you suck. Love and light would not say that you suck. All of that is around forgiveness, not blame, not guilt, not shame. So why are those so pervasive? We gotta unpack these things, y'all. The church has gotta unpack these things. You deserve more.
As I hope I made clear, but in the midst of the doubt, there was, for both of us, I know you're talking about how you were struggling with the connection, but it was still paramount. It was still central, and it was still kind of what everything was based on. And when we felt like we were sort of moving forward and without giving God the credit and without consulting him, we felt bad.
I had one friend besides you that I confided in who didn't go to that church anymore because he was going somewhere else, but I had some resources, and of course Christy. But moving to LA was like a big relief because I could sidestep the whole thing. And just like you said, we both got involved in church out there, and I was like, well, maybe I bet it's different out here. And but we went to what's still like an evangelical church. I was hopeful that it would be like a time where I could remove the pressure, but I could experience, and then I could experience God. But I was very skeptical by this point because of that parallel path. I no longer believed in the Bible as the inerrant word of God. Again, you presented a lot of these resources. It's not like, I don't want to go through all of that.
Yeah.
I think in retrospect, I was slowly crossing the boundary from belief to disbelief. Just like it's a very permeable place. And it's not just, for me, it wasn't just like this one thing happened, but I just started to realize one day I must have overnight experienced some subtle shift that I was just ever so slightly on the other side of a boundary, and I was looking at it from the other side.
Totally. This idea of like a cell membrane where certain things can pass through and other things can't, and you're like kind of stuck in between. During this period of time for me where I was kind of shifting across the membrane, it was like, oh, well, I can practice tarot and still believe in God because God can speak to me through tarot. Whoa, I can learn about Buddhism because Buddhism's really a philosophy and still believe in Jesus. Well, maybe I don't believe God is the only God, but like Jesus was still a great guy. Maybe he's not the only prophet or the one true son, but like I believe in his word. I believe in love God, love one another. And then eventually it's like, oh, I'm not a Christian anymore. At this point for me, it was like, it's not that Christianity is false. It's that so many other things are true. And the premise of Christianity is that this is the one truth. You know the time-lapse videos of a caterpillar in their cocoon, and they're like shaking around and like doing a little jitterbug thing, and then eventually they're like poking their head out and they turn into a butterfly. I guess that's my like cocoon butterfly dance. What? But that's kind of what it feels like, where you're just kind of like in this like pressure cooker, shaking around, and eventually you start poking your head out and realizing, oh, I'm not a caterpillar anymore. I was changing. That whole time I was, and I knew I was changing. But I can fly now. What? I couldn't fly before. And for me, it was really liberating when I kind of had this realization that was like, yeah, I'm not a Christian. I'm not held by anyone's boundaries other than my own. And then eventually you get to start questioning your own boundaries. And why are those the lines and rules and regulations I've set forth for myself? And it continues.
And my growing list of problems with the Bible and evangelicalism, all of a sudden, like all of that, those problems that popped up over my whole life to this point, they had much simpler explanations when I was looking at it from the outside. Plus, the discrimination of the LGBTQ plus communities within the church, that had troubled me for years. And I know that. And all of a sudden...
That's a big one. One, it goes directly against the teachings of Jesus to look down on anyone for any reason and to disallow them from being a part of your community of love is so ass backwards and hateful and hate driven. On top of that, it is indoctrinating so many people into discrimination. Next layer, so many people experience the guilt, shame, self-hatred that I have been talking about. And for me, it's just anxiety and normal things and mistakes. Can you imagine if it was your identity of something you can't control, of who you are? It's just downright wrong. It's hateful and fear-based. And that's about it. That's all I can say. But I'm going to say something else. I do think it's really funny when you hear people say homophobia, I'm not homophobic. I'm not afraid of your sexuality. Yeah, you are. The word is correct, because the thing that you're afraid of is your desires. And the thing that keeps its thumb on top of that is the shame, the guilt, the you're bad, the you're sinful that exists throughout the Christian mythology and theology. Of course, someone honoring their desires, their truth, externally to the church is threatening to you, because you can't do that. And now they're living their life. They're free. They seem happier than ever. That is threatening. And it is fear-based, because it undermines your beliefs.
You're like, hold on. It's like, I can accept everybody. My entire belief system was very tenuous. And I realized, I know about myself, like, you got the two words belief and system, and I know enough about myself to know that, yeah, I thought a lot about the belief, but I cared a lot about the system. I was so uncomfortable with the basis of those and the practical outcome of those, that it overcame my interest in keeping a system. I remember we would hang out with some friends and we would discuss some of this stuff, what we were going through. And there was one guy who was, great guy, he was Christian, who said, I don't want to hear what you're talking about, because I don't want to lose what I have. And I think you'd probably convince me. And this is working for me and my family. So I love you guys, but I got to bow out of this conversation. But I couldn't live like that anymore. I felt like I had to face the facts or the compelling arguments that I had never been willing to look at, because of what I needed, I was getting from my faith. But again, all those things started to shift. You start to think about the billions of people who've sought God for revelation and they've gotten nothing, or they've received profound revelation that is in direct contradiction to the profound revelation that somebody else has gotten. I just found myself starting to believe that, just like you said, that, humans have a way of trying to, we got to make sense of things. Church, to say the least, church became a place of frustration, not comfort for me. Why was I working so hard to make Christianity work for me if it wasn't even true? I think it's because the alternative was so scary. I mean, it was all I knew. It was, you gave the analogy of like the ship and then jumping into this water, and it's like you even look over the side of the ship and you're like, man, it's like everything I've taught is that it's real ugly down there. But at a certain point, you kind of find that you're in midair falling into it anyway. I mean, it's that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can't make someone fall in love with you. You can't, if you find yourself falling out of love with somebody.
Bonnie Raitt said that.
Yeah. I must have replaced the Bible with Bonnie Raitt.
I think this kind of goes back to a little bit of what I was talking about during Rhett's deconstruction too, that is, a lot of this is just what is compelling to you, right? And even with the friend that Link was just talking about, with like, I don't want to hear it, because I don't want to jeopardize what I have. And he's just not compelled in that same way that I was and Rhett and Link are towards this other investigative path, right? And just sheer belief and experience with that can be compelling enough to hold tightly to something. And the same, you can't force someone to fall in love with you. You cannot force someone to believe in God. You cannot force someone out of a belief in God, right? It's like there is just something within your nature that is going to be convinced or not. And I think that even seeing people who become theist that were atheist, or become atheists that were theist, it takes a long time and a lot of mental gymnastics, in the sense that, yes, it takes some jumping through hoops to get there, but also rote practice of thinking about these things. Because in order to kind of work your brain out of the well-worn path of theism, of belief, or of atheism and nothing is here, you have to train your brain to go in another direction. And you're also kind of training your soul, your heart, your energy, whatever you want to call it, to have a different response to stimuli in the world. It's not something that someone else can just say, well, evolution, and that's it, right? Like, that is obviously something that was one domino in Rhett's experience, but that wouldn't have been the only thing, right? And with Link, it's not like, well, just the frustration was kind of like, this is hard, but I can try harder. Clearly, there are so many other facets that surround this. Why are some people called to that? I do think that there is some sort of joining there that I'm deeply fascinated by, that is not about someone's theism or atheism. I was actually having this conversation with my mom on a recent trip we took, and I was like, I think atheists and theists are saying the same thing, because I know a lot of people who say they believe in a higher power that are actually just talking about energy, which we know to be atoms, right? And we have a perfect scientific explanation for it. There's nothing truly immaterial about it in the quantum sense. But then I know a lot of people who are atheists that have a really deep, strong-held belief that there is nothing and it is all science. And I'm like, are y'all not saying the same thing? And is both of that still not grounded some sense in a belief that you are holding about this mystery that none of us know? And I think that kind of conviction, that call, that predisposition towards meaning making that exists across everyone has to be something that it feels divine to me. But I'm also like, is divinity just the language I've been given to understand it? Because it's the closest thing I can think of to that, to like raw experience, to being. When I am just being, it feels so spiritual to me. And when I break it down into science, it loses some of its like glitz and glamour, but it doesn't lose its fascination. It's magic, right? I don't know. There's something there that we need to keep pushing on, that I shall keep pushing on. We'll get back to this at the end of the episode, as well as I talk a little bit about my beliefs.
Well, I completely relate with and agree to everything that you're saying. And I think that I thought a little bit more about that, the boat analogy. And the fact is that, and I think this is one of the reasons that, our friend was like, hey, don't rock my boat, is because it is a boat. The boat's not fake, right? You know what I'm saying? It's like, it is a system. It is beneficial. It has helped millions of people. It's helping millions of people right now. It has stood the test of time. So have other religions. But yeah, because people are like, hold on, if it wasn't real, well, what about your life change and your growth? Well, no, there was real life change. There was real growth. There was real community. There was all these experiences were real in a sense. We're just saying that we think that they were most likely happening in our minds and in everyone else's minds, which are incredible.
Everything is real in a sense. One of the best kind of metaphors for this that's a philosophical thought experiment. It's usually used in the question of consciousness, which I think is kind of wrapped up in a lot of this. Not wrapped up in like finished, but wrapped up as in like tangled up in this, is picture a triangle. Where is that triangle? If I cut open your brain, I'm not going to find a triangle. But that triangle isn't fake. It exists in your mind. It's real in your mind. But what is it? Where is it? What's the quality of realness that holds? And I think that that's kind of true for a lot of spiritual experiences. Even though you've deconstructed from a religion, it doesn't make the growth you experienced while a part of that, or the community you had, false. You still have all of those things, maybe spurred on by this religion. Of course, there's other explanations for all sorts of things, right? The growth we feel, the feelings we feel are real, at least in our consciousness, which gets back to the question of consciousness. So that's for another day.
Incredibly powerful things. It doesn't mean that the change isn't real. Some people that I know, when I tell them my story, will be like, but listen, I know it's real because of what Jesus did in my life. Let me tell you my testimony.
Yeah,
I'm not denying that your life hasn't changed.
And that's what I'm saying. There's sincere experiences to validate
all kinds of things.
Every belief system.
Yeah.
And so I just,
I'll also say one thing that was really freeing with this like nihilism into existentialism of I get to make my own meaning was I get to believe in every single prophet that I want to. I get to believe in Jesus's teachings. I get to believe in the Buddha. I get to believe in Mother Mary's divinity while still believing that she wasn't really a virgin when she got pregnant. It's like I get to choose what inspires me, what brings me meaning, and what I worship, and what I pray to. And the feeling that those things give me is what I find holy for myself now. And in this story of, well, I know Jesus is real because I know of what he did in my life, I'm like, yeah, correct. He is real. I'm not saying he's not. I'm also saying I have a deep connection to all sorts of things that are divinities, energies, entities, science. Everything is real. So you gotta pick, because if everything is real, then nothing is real, then nothing means anything, so everything means something, so it comes back to you. One of my favorite analogies that I have not been able to find where I heard it from, and so I'm beginning to think that I made it up. So if this is me, let me know, because I would love to take credit for it. But if it's not, please tell me in the comments. I just cannot find it. Even more than that, because I wanted to use it in my thesis, and I was like, I don't know what to cite. Anyways, but it's the idea of a light bulb behind a wall. Imagine you're standing in front of a wall, and you're looking through a hole that's, like a Coke can sized hole in the wall. And you can see the light bulb behind it. And the light bulb is shining, and you have a really great view, and it's really clear. You take a few steps back from the wall, and you realize, oh, the wall is covered in holes, actually. And you kind of run over to the side, and you look through this other hole, and then you find a step stool, and you look at a hole really high up, and you crouch down on the ground and look at through a hole down there, and through all of them, you see the same light bulb. And then you step back so you can see the whole wall that's just covered with holes. And you realize, actually, it's not really a wall. It's kind of like a net. It is defined by its holes. And sure, the light bulb's on the other side, but it's still shining on me. And you can still choose to get closer and specific and simplified looking through one hole, or you can step back and see the maze of what this wall with holes looks like and be in admiration of the light bulb from there too. I think this is the truth of these different worldviews. And someone who says, I know Christianity is true because of what Jesus did in my life, they're real close in on one hole. I know you're seeing that light bulb. I would never tell you you're not seeing that light bulb because I know you are. But I know that even though I'm not close up on your hole, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to make a serious point and I'm 12, but you know what I mean. Just because I'm not close up on your worldview of the light bulb doesn't mean I can't still see the light bulb. And it doesn't mean one's better than the other either. Back to the video.
This horse to drink that water.
Well, it doesn't
at
make
this point.
Another way is it doesn't make it true.
It doesn't make it true.
It might make it true or feel true to you, but it doesn't necessarily make it universally true.
The key there is universally true. And the difference between a capital T truth and a lower T truth, right? I think the only thing, to continue the wall light bulb metaphor, the only thing that I would consider at this point in my understanding of the reality of life is that the light bulb is capital T true. Everything else can be true to you in a lower T truth sense.
Just because you had an experience.
So at this point, I mean, again, we must have been discussing this because you used the term like you conducted an experiment, and I definitely remember using that term at the time. I think it was a way to say, hey, I'm going to ease into believing differently and see what happens. Here's what I wrote. Since moving out here, and that's to LA, and combined with Rhett sharing his evolving perspective, I have slowly given up trying to be the Christian that I feel like I've been trying to be all these years. I've concluded that I'm not going to do the things I've always done, the right things, the spiritual disciplines, and expect different results, intimacy with God. Or even more directly, I'm going to give up feeling guilty for not being better and doing better at Christianity. And this experiment has felt good, freeing for the most part. Everything except feeling like I'm letting Christy and the kids down. At this point, I'm not sure if God exists. And you see my mindset at that time, it seemed like I was just saying, I'm gonna stop feeling so guilty for the things I'm not doing to try to be a good Christian, and so it sounds like
that is what this has been leading up to the whole time. I am done feeling guilty over not doing what is right. That's how it opened up. I can't do what's right anymore. And that definition of right is the one that's been given to you by other people, not the one that you've defined for yourself. And this is the beginning of, okay, no more. I want to define it for myself so that it feels good. There is so much power to be had in saying, I'm done playing by someone else's rules. And I'm done making myself feel bad. For what reason? One that I don't think is very good, actually.
I'm like, but I'm just going to be a Christian. I'm going to let go and let God. And I do think that's what a lot of people who maybe hearing in that's maybe how they're responding to my story, is that like, we all go through those times in the struggles you're having. That's common to every person who's like very serious about pursuing Jesus. But I think what was really happening was, yes, that was my true experience, even though I sincerely sought God my entire life. But it primed me to be open to dealing with what I felt were the intellectual things that I didn't list in this journal entry, but I think that's what held the weight to make the decision. That's what eroded the foundation, and it was very important to me. Our marriage could still be vibrant. I had no clue how that would work, though. I believed that I could still be a great father to my kids and that they would be okay. I felt like my kids would be better people. I could influence them in the best way possible by being as honest with them as possible for appropriate to their ages, versus trying to give them what I believed was a false sense of security and teaching something much less
that sense of security that Christianity would bring is a false sense of security. And a false sense of security, I think, actually creates more insecurity in your kids. Because as they get older and they start questioning it too, it's like, well, what's going on? What is actually the truth under here, right? And it's like, well, I don't know. It's like, so you decided to give me this shoddy half answer instead of being honest with me so we can sit in the discomfort together. And as someone who now has the relationship with my parents that is extremely, very much so, we all don't know. Let's talk about it though. That is one of the greatest joys in my life, is to learn from my parents and feel like they are listening to and learning from me too, in all sorts of ways.
Because I wasn't going to give them the fear version that I had gotten. So I felt okay about it.
The fear version.
I guess some people are thinking, could we have found a more liberal, LGBTQ affirming church? Yes. I think you looked around and it was just...
There is a church that when I go to church, I go to this church that is an affirming church.
But you don't really go.
But I don't really go. I'll go sometimes.
I think for me, I didn't...
Christmas.
I was like, I'm just not ready to go to church in general. And I may never be. I'm just not ready to enter back into a specific system of belief, even if it's different and it aligns with like the practical applications of that belief system are exactly in line with how I want to live my life. Maybe I'm still just too close or have been in it so long that I feel like I need more distance from it. I just can't. There's a lot of like, at least all the places that check those boxes, they're like very, what's the word? Ecumenical.
Right.
And it's like, okay, that's like a high church thing. And it's like, I don't think I would thrive well under that system because as much as I loved systems, I do think that.
I think there is something really poignant about what Link is saying here. It's almost like grief, where right after a loved one dies, if you see a picture of them or something triggers a memory, it's really hard and you are going to likely like break down and have a moment with it. But 10 years later, you see that picture and it brings you warm memories, right? The grief isn't gone, but it's grown with you. I think it's really similar when you're still so close to processing through this. I mean, it is a sense of grief. You are losing this relationship. You're losing a sense of safety and belonging and community and a belief system. And it's grieving all sorts of things. The relationship you had with God, the relationship you did have with your partner, with your kids, with your family, with your friends. It's earth-shattering. And rebuilding. But when you're still so close to the impetus of that, it's like, I can't go back yet. I'm going to fall apart. Now, I enjoy on the occasion going to a mass or a Christian service and seeing how I feel and taking what I take from it and leaving the rest. I also really enjoy going to Buddhist temples and experiencing the different meditations that they offer there and witnessing the practices that they hold. I've also been to a few mosques and witnessed a few different ceremonies that they have there that has been really informative and beautiful, and just trying to learn and soak up as much as possible, right? And it's much easier for me now. I'm 10 years from calling myself a Christian at this point, so it's been some time. Give the process grace. Give yourself grace, because it is so complex and it's wrapped up in everything. It takes time to untangle all of those knots and to really brush through it in a way that feels good without snagging on your hair, right? And every now and then you'll find a knot you didn't quite catch and you got to go back and work on it a little bit, and it's going to hurt and maybe some tears will spring to your eyes, but then eventually it'll get smooth again. And that's just the process of it.
as I'm beginning to learn about myself, and as I read those journal entries to you and like my internal dialogue, I think you're seeing, as I am appreciating that, like, I put a lot of pressure on myself, and I don't interact in a healthy way at this point in my life with a robust belief system.
Yeah.
So,
Very self-aware.
You ended up saying that you applied the label of like hopeful agnostic to where you were right now, and I mean, if I were to label myself, I think I would say I'm an agnostic who wants to be hopeful. I think I have made a decision to be open. I do want that. I don't want to be, I just, I don't want to be an atheist. So I'm hopeful that I can be hopeful.
Really interesting too that I don't want to be an atheist. I had that as well. I think I mentioned that a little bit during Rhett's episode. I keep saying that. I would recommend watching that one too. I think these color each other very nicely, of course. To not want to be an atheist, there is something that feels almost like the final frontier is like no God at all, and there's something deeply scary about that, more so than even losing this belief system. And I think that really being the final question that I'm still grappling with now is like, okay, well, how do we bridge these gaps and still find a worldview that I can live in a way that I'm comfortable with, that makes sense for me, that I feel like makes me a good, better person, but to not want to be an atheist. I think that that is just such a part of the fear that comes with the unknown that we're both kind of indoctrinated into in a Christian background, but also just with the mystery in general. I think it's so indicative of why religion exists to begin with. It's like, I don't want that. Even if it doesn't feel scary to say there is no God, it's like, well, I'm not really scared of that, but I don't want it. There's something about the purpose and meaning and the mystery that is just kind of, let's hold on to that. It makes me a better person. It gives me hope. It gives me faith. It gives me purpose. But I think that there is a way to do all of those things while investigating all of these questions. And I think where my fear was, I don't want to project this onto Link at all, but where my fear was with not wanting to ask that question of myself for a really long time was in, what if this truly all does mean nothing? What if it means nothing? What then?
But I know that it kind of...
Why don't you want to be an atheist?
Because I'm not convinced that God doesn't exist, and I don't want to, I want to be open to that connection. I'm that's just not, it's not how I think, like to come down hard on something and like, but I think that left to my own devices, from a practical standpoint, I would end up as like a practical atheist, where it's like, you know what? I do feel like it's easiest for me to believe that when you die, it's just like Dana Carvey, my Wayne's World doppelganger. I'm replacing the Bible with Garth.
Atheism is the most logical. I don't think that's a good reason for holding that as a belief, but I do think it's the most logical.
And Bonnie Raitt, it seems.
Right.
I remember years ago when I was listening to the WTF podcast, Dana Carvey was talking about how he believed that, like, when you die, it's just like the experience you had before you were born. Do you remember that? So I'm like, yeah, that's actually comforting. And I find it easy to believe that for some reason. It's not, I'm not compelled to believe it. I'm not compelled, but it's just an easy place for my mind to rest.
It just feels too definitive.
Right.
Agnostic is the label that literally means you don't know. And I hope I'm always, when it comes to these issues, I hope I just don't
But
I don't want to become dogmatic about anything.
Yeah, but I don't want to become complacent either, because I do think that it's easiest for me to believe that everybody believes whatever they want to believe. Like your innermost desires, maybe it could be something primal like survival and security. And there's so many different things, but like we have a way of finding what works for us. And I think that's instinctive. So just to put it bluntly, you believe what you want to believe. I just want to do the work to stay open, but not to get, like you said, dogmatic. And I know.
Do the work to stay open. That is beautiful. We should all be doing the work to stay open because it is work. I find myself every single day when there's a belief I can kind of latch onto or get curious about, kind of feeling myself like, okay, let's get comfortable. Let's snuggle into this really neat picture. And it's like, no. It's not that neat. Don't get cozy. How can we find comfort in the discomfort? How can we feel safe in the uncertainty? That's the work of staying open.
That takes work. It takes an investment of time and priority for me to not just sit back and
I just pause and then say the things they're about to say.
Of like, I'm not looking, again, it's not looking for the next thing to latch onto and believe and start to follow, but it's being open to how God may exist and may want to connect with me. I think the main thing is I don't want to judge. I don't want to condemn. I want to be as loving as I can. Maybe that sounds trite. It does, but so what? I want to be as loving as I can. And, I do feel like over the past few years, my capacity to love has grown. My capacity to love myself and others has expanded a lot more in the last few years. And I take that as a good sign. I just don't think that God, if God exists or
did that, it is a good sign to love yourself more. My capacity to love myself has grown. Man, I don't want to drop this because it's a nice microphone, but mic drop. Stupid. But how cool my capacity to love myself has grown. That makes me want to pop a bottle of champagne and do high kicks. I want everyone to have that feeling each day. Chase the things that give you that. My capacity to love myself and others has grown. That's the stuff.
However God exists, I just can't believe that, that me being open and sincere and as loving as possible and as honest as possible is disqualifying me from receiving God's love. I feel like a lot of what I say could be boiled down to some neurosis. It's like, but a
lot of what I relate to in Link's story, I even was relating back to my mental health, right? And would I have found something else to have had neurosis or mental health triggers around? Probably. But anything that is capable of giving you that much self-doubt and self-hatred is not healthy.
But the intellectual path, it's the two things. I think the one made me receptive to the other, and I just think it's got to be so. And that's truth.
And that's where Rhett came down too, and I think that is truth the light bulb? I did say that earlier, didn't I? I said the only thing that feels like capital T truth is the light bulb behind the wall. And maybe the truth of the human experience is the search for truth. We can make meaning, but you can't make truth is the truth that we make meaning. There's a really interesting relationship there that I'll have to keep unfolding. But I think when something feels deeply untrue or deeply true, you can't logic your way around it. It's like when it comes to belief, you believe it or you don't. Believe is a verb, right? You can't, in fact, is a noun. It's like, do you believe or do you not? It is in action.
Most people, and I totally get why this is the case, are going to interact with our stories in whatever way makes sense according to their predetermined worldview.
Right.
So if you're a Christian and you're not a Christian that has had a lot of doubts, or you're just like 100% sure that you're right, you're most likely, you're going to filter us through your theology, just like I was talking about at the beginning of my story. So you may conclude that, well, you guys were definitely never actual Christians. It was an intellectual thing that's specifically addressed in the Bible, and, God's going to say he never knew you. And if that makes you, I understand why you have to believe that. I don't accept that, but I can't make you change your mind. And then there's a lot of other situations that people may find that, but you're going to make it consistent with your predetermined belief. The only thing I ask about, and I hope that this was clear, and Link made it, I tried to make it clear, and Link tried to make it clear, that we are just kind of telling our story, trying to be as honest as possible about what transpired in our lives that kind of led us to this point. And I would love if the conversation would be, tell us your story. Consider somebody's viewpoint,
I also wonder if people's takeaway is, like, dang, Link, if it wasn't for Rhett, you might be in a better place. It's like, man, he really brought you down.
Link had that doubt before.
It's absolutely true that, and that I wouldn't have been grappling with these issues. I probably wouldn't have been grappling with issues. I probably wouldn't have done it, because as a hard time as I was having, I still didn't want, it was still ultimately so very safe for me, and I really need that. But I'm very.
Link could have been at that crossroads like their friend that they mentioned earlier was, that was like, hey, Rhett, I get it. Please don't talk to me about this. But by saying, I'm just going to be a sounding board and I'm going to listen, those ideas did get in. And I do think that, yeah, of course their stories impact one another. How could they not have, right? I think the people that we grow with and do life with inevitably should impact the way we view the world. That's just how that works. And I don't think that should take anything away from Link's agency or take anything away from Rhett's reasoning or their friendship or relationship. I think if anything, that should add to the beauty that is human relationship, that we get to have a wider range of experiences because of the people that we welcome into our lives, and vice versa.
But there was pivotal points all along the way when I would have to pick up those books and read them. It wasn't just the Francis Collins one, because it started to get real. And it was like, I got to read this stuff for myself. That'll transition to my, well, I'll let you respond to that, because I think that people might say it's your fault.
It is. No, I'm very conscious of that. I think that, interestingly, the other way around, like in any testimony that you give, that you hear somebody give in the church, it usually comes down to a person who shared the gospel with them, right? Like people share the message, and for better or worse, it also works the other way. It's like, I'm a key figure in your anti-testimony. It's just, and at no point was I trying to convince you of anything. And at no point was I trying to I
was the only person you could talk to who would just
I was confiding in you.
talk. Yeah.
I was confiding in you.
And I think that I did not want to, in my session here, I didn't want to retread the reasons that you gave, the arguments that were compelling for you. That was because you gave some of those and you gave resources. But I also didn't want to do it because I didn't want to share a story that was, whenever my beliefs started to pivot, I described those in like a timeline fashion, but I intentionally didn't describe, well, what is it that made you believe that Jesus didn't raise from the dead? What is it that made you believe that you couldn't, that you saw Paul differently, or, all of the arguments, I didn't make them because I feel like as a listener, it's up to them, it's up to you to look into that if you want to.
I appreciate your story because, my guess is that more people relate to your story than mine. That's my, in my experience, when I talk about the things that happen with me, again, like I said, a lot of people just are like, you're crazy. Like, why do you think about these things?
Or at least, well, he lost me.
Yeah, and
so it's like that meant a lot to him, but like I don't think it matters that much, really.
And I think yours was very personal, and it was about what you were kind of experiencing on a practical level, which I think more people will relate to.
We'll speak at you next week, probably about something else.
About something else,
and then we'll see if we most likely will come back to it. Thank you.
Well, here we are. I am feeling really full right now. This is just so fun. This is like what I do for fun in my free time, and talk about these things, and revisiting these episodes specifically has just felt really cool to go back to something. I remember actually the first time after I listened to these episodes, getting dinner with my parents at Chewy's, which if you've never been to Chewy's, you have to go. Please get creamy jalapeno. Creamy jalapeno is maybe my favorite food. Tangent. We were getting dinner, and I think I just talked to them about these episodes for the entire hour and a half that we were sitting in this Tex-Mex restaurant. So thank you, if you are here listening and watching, for coming along with me on this journey for these first 2 episodes. To dive a little bit more into where I'm at in my spiritual journey, I would recommend, if you haven't listened to the first episode, to go listen to that, because that gets into a bit more details about the actual kind of timeline for me. And I know I've kind of jumped around throughout it. So if y'all want a more condensed, precise, specific, I'll call it a reconstruction story for me, let me know. I'd be happy to do something like that. I think that would be, similarly to what Link said at the very beginning of this episode, really beneficial for me to kind of revisit that and create something with a narrative behind it to present. I think would be really, really fascinating and a good growth exercise. So maybe I'll do it anyways. Whether or not you want to see it, it'll be out there. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But for me right now, I don't think I really have a label like hopeful agnostic or hopefully hopeful agnostic. For a really long time, I called myself agnostic, and I think from the outside looking in, that's probably the best label for it. But there's this quote that Rhett actually now has quoted a couple times, and I'm forgetting who said it originally, but it is, "I will live and die on this fence." Actually, let me Google it real quick. Okay, that's really crazy actually, because I could have sworn that Rhett said that this was a quote about someone that he listened to about spirituality, but everything that comes up when you Google it is Psalm 118:17. "I will not die, but I will live and proclaim what the Lord has done." Really fascinating. Maybe it's a Rhettism, and I just assumed that he was quoting someone, or I misremembered that. But anyways, I've heard him say, "I will live and die on this fence between theism and atheism," and I think that there's something really beautiful in that. And what I would say is that I've kind of chopped up the fence and cooked it into a souffle. Or for me, pancakes. I've cooked it into some delicious fence pancakes, and I want to take a bite every day, in the sense that I don't just want to sit on it. And I don't think that's what anyone who says this, or Rhett specifically, is intending by this. I think the reason why I feel called to kind of add to this metaphor is that I want to encapsulate a little bit what Link was saying about doing the work, the active work of spirituality, of curiosity, of staying open. And I think that's what this feels like, to take a bite of the fence every day and to digest it, to really chew it, to digest it and to process it, right? There is something powerful in thinking about the work of that. And that's what I believe in. I believe in the work of this. In some more specificity about how do I define my higher power, my God. I tend to call God source. There is something about the language of God that feels very Christian to me, feels Abrahamic, and I think that calls up a lot of associations for a lot of people, myself included, and so source feels a little more accessible to me right now. I think I also like, anytime I say God, to use they them pronouns, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, or she her. I posted an Instagram post in the caption from a trip to Japan that I took. And the caption was, God is a woman and I found her in Japan. And a few people asked me, why are you saying God is a woman? And I typed out my response and sent it. And it was like, look, I think God actually is probably non-binary, but there is something in me that likes pushing that button just a little bit to make people think, why do you raise your eyebrows at me saying God is a woman, but you never would at someone saying God is a man? There's something I like about pushing that envelope just a little bit. Feels like safe rebellion to me, I think. So I tend to use the word source, but within source, I also like that can talk about our parents. That can talk about our inception, right? It also talks about ancestry and DNA to me. And these are all things that I find to be deeply spiritual. As someone who has anxiety and OCD. I've been in therapy since I was 12, and those experiences, the experience of my mental health and growing and working on that and through that, has been a really big part of my self-growth and coming to know myself and understand myself, and what does healing mean to me, and how can healing actually be a spiritual experience? And then when you bring that into therapy, what does that mean and what does that look like? Thinking about all of that in the context of why am I here? We know that mental health and plenty of other things are genetic. Both of my parents also have their own experiences with mental health that, makes sense why I have the diagnoses that I do. And ancestrally, I did 23andMe a while ago, and it taught me a lot about my genetics. And it was interesting the way that there are things that you can predict about yourself. And so there is something that I am sourced from in DNA. There is something about me that was derived from that. I also think that, we know scientifically that ancestry does carry trauma through an ancestral line. There was a study done with mice. So when I was originally recording this, I described the study completely incorrectly. So I edited that little bit out. And what the study actually shows is that mice that were exposed to electromagnetic shocks, when they have kids, those children have the same genetic evidence of having been exposed to the same electromagnetic shocks. This is obviously a way oversimplification of the study, so everything is linked in the description box down below if you are interested in learning more. I'll try and link it down below. So we know that ancestral trauma is real. That happens scientifically, genetically. I think there's also a really interesting spiritual element to ancestral trauma and the ancestral line of, for instance, witches and the women that were persecuted in the Salem witch trials, and other religious persecution of women throughout history is something that I've always been very fascinated by. And as I've explored occultism and witchcraft and these different, people call them new agey, but they're actually old agey traditions, it's been very fascinating to me about why am I so drawn to this? And I think that also feels very much like source to me. I'll also pull in from the scientific realm quantum physics. I'm not an expert by any means, but the things that I do know is that everything is made of atoms, right? And this table, my laptop, this microphone, me, are all made of tiny particles that are moving around extremely, extremely quickly. So quickly, in fact, that it's actually not really a solid object. It is moving around so fast next to other atoms that it gives our brains the illusion that it is a solid object. That means when I am touching this microphone, I am actually not really touching the microphone because my hand is actually a material and the microphone is actually a material. But also, they're trading atoms right now when they're in proximity. How does that freaking work? It's insane, right? But they are. We're slightly trading atoms. And energy is shared like this across sentient and non-sentient things. And we also know that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It has to come from somewhere. There is a source. And in that way, I do believe that I am made up of the same stuff as the stars. I am made of star stuff, right? At some point, the energy that is moving around so quickly in the form of atoms to make up my body and to make up my DNA is the same energy that is moving around so quickly to make up the sun, the moon, the stars, our solar system. I think there's a lot of things here to be drawn about the Big Bang as well, with energy not being created or destroyed. This is something I'm kind of tossing around within my own brain right now and would love any research recommendations anyone has. But the Big Bang can't really have ever ended and also can't really have ever started. And if that's true, is everything just happening all at once, everything everywhere all at once, but our brains are processing it in a linear experience? I don't know. Time and materialism is very odd within this concept, but I'll throw that out as a big question mark I have within all of this. There's also the concept of a gyre, G-Y-R-E, and a gyre is a shape, a vortex shape that stacks on top of itself, on bottom of itself, and in a three-dimensional shape. A gyre is the shape of the double helix of our DNA. It is also the same shape of the pattern that the planets make in our solar system. On a microscopic level and a macroscopic level, energy is moving in a gyre. There's just something so fascinating about that to me. And when we think of things atomically, break it down to energy, I go back to this idea of Arthur C. Clarke's third law: any sufficient science is indistinguishable from magic. That feels like magic to me. The fact that the planets in our solar system and my DNA create the exact same shape, and that I am actually non-material. I'm atoms that are moving so quickly that they feel solid. That's magic. That's not real. But it is. It's science. Forgive me for any misstatements as well. I am not a scientist. I am a researcher. I do my best to understand these concepts, but I'm a writer and life coach by trade, so I really like to deal more in language when I communicate these things. So if I slightly misrepresent or misstate things, I appreciate your grace on that front. But that feels like magic, and yet we know it's scientifically true. So now we bring in this idea of God. If something has to be provable, but also not provable, because we need to have faith to believe in something that cannot be proven, that feels like all of these theories to me, like the fact of the gyre, the fact that atoms are just energy, that nothing is physical, but that nothing can be created or destroyed. It's like all of these things together make up this concept of God in my mind. I think also to the philosophical idea of the immovable mover. If something has to have always been here because energy cannot be created or destroyed, I tend to kind of think that God is the Big Bang. And the reason why we all feel this sensus divinitas is because we are a part of God. Jorge Luis Borges calls human beings fingertips of God's existence. And I think that's so beautiful. And I think everything, I'm like looking at my bedroom right now, everything is made up of God's stuff. And when we boil it down, it's immaterial. It's unproven. And yet, those are the things that have always existed because this energy was not created and will not be destroyed. So is that science? Is that spirituality? It's source. That's what it is to me. And so I think some people would listen to me talk about this and say, well, yeah, you're an atheist. You don't believe in Sky Daddy. You don't believe in a religion. You don't believe in a higher power. And then other people would look at that and say, well, there's something magical that you're adding to the science. Like, you're not actually a materialist. You believe something else is arising out of this. And to both of those, I say, yeah. And that's why I want to bake the fence into pancakes. Because I don't even really feel comfortable sitting on the fence. I think that atheism, theism, and agnosticism actually creates this weird Venn diagram, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Whatever truth actually is, I do believe in the light bulb. I do believe in wanting to experience it, and I do believe that the human experience is a part of the bigger picture. I also will throw out there that I do practice some witchcrafty things. I do consider myself to be a witch. That is a deep part of my spiritual practice. When you hold the belief that I do, that everything is energy and kind of has its own energetic signature, crystals start to make a lot of sense. Sage and herbs and Palo Santo start to make a lot of sense because, of course, when you burn something or you hold something close, it gives you a feeling. It elicits a different energetic response in your cells, in your atoms. You start to believe in sound bowls and sound healing and sound therapy. And that science starts to make a lot of sense because if my atoms are just vibrating at a certain frequency, as is everything else, you're going to find people who vibrate at that same frequency. You're going to hear sounds that vibrate at that frequency, and sounds want to meet each other in frequency. So if I'm exposed to sound bowls, my cells are going to start vibrating differently. And if I hold a rose quartz in my hand is going to start to feel that energy as the quartz in my hand trade atoms with one another somehow, magically and scientifically. Again, I've mentioned tarot a few times in this, and I think that that's something that any worldview can be mapped onto. Any belief in higher power is strong enough to speak to you through cards, obviously, but also even if tarot, astrology, insert any esoteric practice here, metaphysical practice here, even if it is just psychology and your brain making something out of it, that is still a tool for self-growth. Even if it's you making your own meaning out of it, we make our own meaning out of everything anyways. Why not have a practice that is fun, that feels sacred to you, that can help you with your growth? It's the same thing as reading self-help. It's the same thing as reading the Bible. It is something that is triggering thought. And if it is something that is bringing you closer to what feels truth, that what rings to truth, that is the frequency of truth to you, I say do it. I say go for it, and don't judge what someone else is doing unless they are hurting themselves or others. Or I guess, unless they are hurting others. I do think it's kind of your right to, I don't want anyone to hurt themselves. I do think it's kind of your right to do that, but okay, tangent, different thing, Reese. Within all of that as well, different energies, witchcraft, the idea of like deities and ghosts gets in here too, and then we also have the idea of like angels and demons. Then you add in different literary ideas that come into play with holy texts, and life becomes this beautiful melting pot of meaning. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm trying to do the work of seeing the divinity in everything and not taking myself too seriously. I do believe that God is in everything, and I think that that makes me a better person. I think it makes me treat other people, animals, and entities and things better, sentient or not. I think it makes me kinder. It also makes me more honest and not just nice, but kind. Being able to hold both scientific beliefs and spiritual beliefs is deeply empowering for me. And I also, similarly to Rhett and Link, want to do the work to stay open, to stay curious. I think curiosity is a deeply spiritual practice for me. When you start to see everything as divine, everything feels sacred. Reading a shitty romance novel feels sacred, and listening to a comedy podcast feels sacred. Drinking a can of Coke feels sacred. And also, the things that we know are sacred feel so precious. My best friend's smiles. Hugging my mom. moving halfway across the world, being here at all with this awareness and consciousness. It's mind-bogglingly beautiful in a terrifying sense. It is like the sublime experience of being a human being. And so I'm trying to carry that into everything I do and every interaction I have, because I think it makes me better, like I was saying. And it also gives me drive. It gives me focus. And it gives me a purpose to help other people find what gives them this feeling too. This feeling of sanctity, of being a sacred being and treating everything else as sacred. And then, of course, you fall down the rabbit hole of, if everything is sacred, then nothing is sacred. And then I say, yes, everything is sacred because we make it so. And I get to make meaning out of that. And that's kind of how I've been making meaning. I jumble up a bunch of different things and go with it. One practice I'll share with you that I really, really enjoy as well is what I call making your own Bible. This is something I've done. I'm forgetting where I even heard this, but I heard it at some point in high school in some podcast, and it was someone that said, like, you should make your own Bible. Like, put together all of the things that strike true to you, that ring resonant. And I was like, that's such a good idea. So that is something I do. I have both a physical kind of copy of things printed out and like a note on my phone to like write down things when it happens, and I try and make it look pretty, and it's kind of like a witchcraft grimoire-esque, also like Bible, holy text, also like journal and like scrapbook all in one. And it's creative. I get to use stickers, and I also get to flip through it and be reminded of the beautiful words that have changed my life, and media that has changed my life, and people that have changed my life. And yeah, so that's a spiritual practice that I've really been enjoying too, that I would encourage you to do as well. I'll also say the other spiritual practice I do is this. This very much feels like communion to me, in the truest sense of the word, that I am communing with something greater than myself, in the way that I believe that we are all bits and pieces of God. You are too. And when we are all together, that is more godliness. It's like to have a little bit of God in me is infinite godness, right? In the way that God has to be infinite. But when we're together, it does feel like even more infinite godliness, because there's more of us with God in us. But I'll leave you with this. If you take a cup and dip it into the ocean, and you have a glass cup filled with ocean water, is that cup the ocean? Well, I don't know. I wouldn't say that this cup is the ocean, but what's inside of the cup? Ocean water. You wouldn't just say water. It's like, no, there's definitely some ocean in there, but it's not the ocean. The ocean is so much faster. That's kind of how I view us. And I would like to think that while I am in this clear glass form, human being form being the clear glass, experiencing what it's like to be the ocean in this incarnation, that I learn something new, that I get to explore every edge of the ocean that I have been given. And then eventually, once all of that ocean in my clear glass has been explored, I'll be poured back into the big ocean. I hope that I get to take some of my clear glass with me, but I don't know if I do. And I think that hope might come from my ego and the Reese-ness that I feel that I have and am. And maybe once I'm poured back into the ocean, I won't have that need anymore, and that's kind of the final frontier. Or maybe not. I don't know. I again just want to reiterate that I have so much respect for Rhett and Link as creators, as friends, as husbands, as dads, as business owners. Like, the model they've created too is deeply inspiring to me. And I think more than anything, I deeply respect their vulnerability, and the way that that speaks through their creative projects is inspiring at the level of like, wow, I want to create something like that. I've always said the best works of art are the ones that make you wish that you had that skill, right? Like my favorite songs are the ones that make me want to learn to play guitar. My favorite musicals are the ones that make me wish that I could belt. My favorite YouTubers are the ones that make me wish I was that vulnerable. I've always said that. But truly, that is to me just like the foundation of being inspired by something. And it makes me want to learn and grow and then do it and try it and take risks. So a huge thank you to them for putting this out there, being an inspiration to me, and for being a part of my daily routine. Ram Dass says, death is like taking off a tight shoe. And Alan Watts says, trying to define the self is like trying to bite your own teeth. So I'll be here in my tight shoes and biting my teeth until I see you next time. Thank you so much for being here. And as always, I hope you feel like you are living more coherently. Until next time, love.